And Sharon, I think I can go ahead and introduce the next item because it's not a voting item. Michael Smith, you're on for a discussion of speed limit policy.
Okay, Councilman Seconder asked to have a discussion on speed limit policy, and I put together in the memo in the packet a little bit of background on the state and national guidance on this. You know, all the streets in Dunwoody except for the access roads along 285 and Peachtree Industrial are local roads, so the city has the ability to set those speed limits. But the catch is that under state law, to be able to use radar detection for enforcement, the state has to approve a radar permit for the city, and that goes through the Department of Public Safety. They rely on Georgia DOT to evaluate the engineering study that's required to justify the speed limit. And so in essence, you know, to run radar for enforcement on any road in the city, that has to be approved by DOT. And the state, you know, has certain things that they look at when they do that. Both the state law and national policy reference the need to do an engineering study and then look at characteristics of the roadway, the users of the roadway, the prevailing speed. And so, you know, that's the process we've used, and we've worked with GDOT. The permit's approved every 3 years, the radar permit for the city. That's submitted by the police department. Any changes that are made to that as far as speed limits go, we've worked with GDOT, and sometimes they approve those requests and sometimes they don't, just based on their evaluation. But that's how the process works, and I'll stop there for discussion.
Joe, do you want to start?
Sure, thanks. So I really thank you, Michael, for that presentation. And what I wanted to just kind of level set of where we are and just ask for the council consideration as a discussion, whether what, you know, Michael just mentioned some of the things of putting that in a one-stop shop policy, of us drafting a policy, putting all the nuts and bolts of how it works, how things happen, how the inputs, process, and output happen, write that in a policy as a takeaway, defining the process, defining when and if council should be involved along that process. And so with the goal of the outcome, my minimum ask of my members on council sitting up there today is that we would go forward evaluating what that policy looks like, define a policy, and present it back to council for potential adoption. That's my ask to the folks on council, rather than go into the nuts and bolts of what that policy looks like today. Just to say, should we undertake that, to look at that? Some of the things, and I'll also go just so kind of take it up another notch, is that some cities do have written policies. Chamblee has a written policy. It's formalized and so on, that council gets to see. A year ago, Sandy Springs presented their speed study back to their council up and down, and they made some modifications with their city spring center and so on. So it did get to council at that level. And also, I know that we want to re-engineer our streets so it's safe, and the end state is it's safe for kids and parents and families and so on, for all users of the road. But we also say, what can we do today in an all of the above fashion, without spending millions of dollars? What can we do today? There are studies out there today that have said, even by changing the posted sign limit, the limit on a sign, without changing the characteristics of the roadway, there will be a reduction in speed across the total numbers. So there are studies showing that. So anyhow, going back to the idea of having a policy of looking at what triggers changes, what would trigger a change ever in City of Dunwoody to a speed limit, so we understand that, where that comes from, i.e. crashes, change in use or design characteristics of the roadway, citizen input or council, understanding who vets it and when in that process. So I'd like to be able to just kind of formulate that, put that out there over the next few months with staff and offer the advice of other folks. We have here in City of Dunwoody, George, we have folks that are knowledgeable and other people that are within the region and state that work within transportation safety and understanding what other cities do and how they do that. So that's where I came from, and that's why I thank Michael for doing the introduction here and just see what you all think about that.
Does anybody have anything to add or questions to ask? John, I see you.
Yeah, I guess where I'm at on this is I really want the lowest speed limit that's enforceable. And I think that's what I thought we had currently. Is it not, Michael? I mean, how does that work? What are we allowed to, besides setting the policy up or down? But right now, do we have the lowest speeds possible that are enforceable as per state certificate?
I would say in general, we do. I mean, we've had cases where we've asked the state to, well, for example, Perimeter Center East at one time was 35 miles an hour. We asked the state to reduce it to 25. They came back and said we could reduce it to 30. So that's what we did. So from the standpoint of having speeds that can be approved for radar permit enforcement, I'd say in general we have speed. I think there's cases here and there where we could incrementally look to get the state to reduce the speeds, but I think in general, I think most of our roads are neighborhood roads and other roads are 25 miles an hour. We have a few 35 and 140 and 145, I think. So I'd say in general that the speeds are close to as low as the state's going to approve at this point. And we'd have to look at changing the characteristics of the roadway to really make any other big changes that the state would approve.
And I know that a lot of the recommendations are based on the municipal transportation guidelines. And I think with speed limits, we're also talking about safety, right? Pedestrian safety, bike safety, crosswalk safety. I'm not sure we have a really good core set of requirements. The conversation I was in with somebody today regarding stop bars. Are stop bars required? Not required. There's no uniformity within the city limits anywhere. And if it's, I don't know if it's in the manual or not in the manual, but it's not consistent. I'd love to find ways, little incremental things that would make it safer for pedestrians, for traffic, for bicyclists, all the way around. I'd like that to be part of this policy as well. If we're looking at how to do this, I'd like it to be a uniform across the board look at how we're doing everything. That's my only comment.
Anyone else? Jim.
Just a quick comment. I mean, I pretty much agree with everything John just said. The flip side is, personally, this is not something I want to spend a lot of time getting into the weeds on. And an example that was brought up in the discussion was, okay, Austin's school zone moved because Austin moved a half mile down the road. Well, great. That just happened between, the change in the school zone and the speed limits associated with that just happened probably as part of a, working it out between the school system and Public Works. And that just happened, and I didn't have to know anything about it, and I'm quite happy with that. I don't want to have to know about that. That's why we have, competent people like Michael Smith working for us here at the city, and so we don't have to get into that detail. So I just wanted to bring that up. I mean, I'm just not sure where we're trying to get with this that we don't have already. I mean, if you've got specific examples of where you think the speed limits are too high that we ought to reduce them, I'm all ears. But I just don't know where we're going with this, to be quite honest.
To that, yeah. Michael, I'm intrigued with the Perimeter Center East ask from 35 down to 25, and we settled at 30. Why did you ask? Like, what precipitated the the ask to GDOT for that?
That one was, we had a few requests from residents that lived in that area, and then I think it got to the council, and the council asked us to look into it. I mean, yeah, the few changes that we've made over the years have generally come from citizen and council requests. There's, staff hasn't really initiated on its own any changes to the speed limit.
Okay, so we have a process that, yeah, okay, thank you.
Tom?
I just had a question. It's more of a curiosity. One of the things in your memo, I just wanted to get some clarification on the pacing. I guess the 85th percentile kind of sets the speed. I mean, I think most people in this area in particular have a pretty heavy foot. Is that saying that the state allows drivers to determine what the speed is regardless of whether that is the most appropriate speed for a particular road?
Yeah, the idea with the pace of speed is that if you arbitrarily set the speed limit too low, and the characteristic, drivers tend to gauge how fast to drive, whether their judgment is good or not. They take their cues from the roadway itself and the feel and environment of the roadway. And so the idea is that, however you define the pace, whether it's the 85th percentile or the average speed or whatever, that, if you set the speed limit much different from the speed that people feel comfortable driving on that roadway, that it's not really going to change behavior. They're going to continue to drive the speed that they feel comfortable on that roadway. And I mean, you see that a little bit with our traffic calming program. All those streets are posted at 25 miles an hour, but in some cases, we have to install physical traffic calming to bring the speeds down because people aren't driving 25 miles an hour, even though that's the posted speed limit. So that's the idea behind pace of speed. Historically, I think the 85th percentile speed has been what's the measure that's been used to define that. I think there's some flexibility. There's some discussions at the national level that may, in the near future, there may be some more flexibility, and people may start looking at other ways to define that pace of traffic other than just the 85th percentile. But I think historically that's what GDOT has looked at and as part of their evaluation.
Okay, thank you. And you kind of helped me segue into my next point a little bit when you talked about how the roads are designed, because I think that's an important factor in speed as well, is the engineering of roads. As we know, the roads tend to be engineered for cars as opposed to other modes of transportation. And so, I know we have our complete streets policy, and I know we look at doing things to help control speed. As we do that, I don't know if this kind of dovetails into that, as we have projects that come along, and I'll just use the multi-use trail on Mount Vernon as an example. I'm not saying that we need to do anything there specifically or not, but projects that specifically change the characteristics of an area, adding pedestrian and bike facilities, or a development that we know will have, a park or an amenity that's going to attract more people. I think it would be a good idea to have an automatic trigger to review the speed in those situations. And perhaps that could be rolled into a policy as well, just to make sure that the existing speed is appropriate for what the new conditions of that area will be.
Yes, one of the things in some of the national guidance that it references specifically, when you have a project or a development or something that alters the characteristics of the roadway, then that's a time when you should reevaluate the speed limit.
So in other words, we basically already do everything, like you just stated, Michael, plus if a citizen comes to us and then we ask you to look into a certain street and speed, you do that. So I guess I'm going with what is our real ask here to do different. I guess is that Joe's? I guess that would be for Joe. Yeah.
Yes, it would be for Joe, but can I say something first?
Yes.
Sorry.
Yeah,
I mean, we
yes.
can, so a couple things. One is back to John's question about the lowest speed limit possible. Is it possible for us to know that information? Like, I don't want to make, like, is there a way to put in our work plan that we're going to get that information? I'd like to know where we're above maybe the minimum of enforceable speed, but more complex than that. You know, Ashford, Dunwoody, and Mount Vernon, but the small neighborhood streets, are we 25 in all of those? Are there neighborhood streets that are above 25? I'd like to make sure that they're not. There's probably not, but
Yeah, I don't know of any neighborhood streets that are above 25. And 25 is the lowest that I think the state would approve for any road.
when we asked them to lower the speed limit around in Meadow Lake, they said no, right?
Yeah, there we asked to create a school zone so that you could do enforcement for 1 mile over, and they denied that.
Right. Is there an appeals process? Just thinking off the top of my head, sorry.
Not a formal appeals process. After the last round that we sent to the state, I had a good conversation with one of the district traffic engineers, and I think, like I said, I think there's some opportunities to go back on a few that we've looked at and give them more information and try, you know, we may not get from 35 to 25, but we can maybe get from 35 to 30. You know, that's where I say I think there's room in some cases to get some incremental reductions. And so, I mean, specifically the two that I know of that we submitted recently were Ashford Dunwoody to reduce it from 45 to 35, and Chamblee Dunwoody in the village to go from 35 to 25. And those were both denied, but I think we can go back and maybe instead of getting it 10 miles an hour down, we could get it 5 miles an hour down.
Yeah, that would be a good incremental step. I think that one of the questions here, and Joe can address it, I guess, is this a policy change we need or a new policy created, or is this a part of a process that we already do that council just needs to be made aware of? So we already have sort of the process where either something triggers it, like the village changes, I think is what triggered it for Chamblee Dunwoody, or citizen complaints on Ashford Dunwoody. So what, and then, but you know, do you automatically, like when we're doing an intersection improvement project or paving or sidewalks, do we automatically look at the speed limits or should we automatically look at the speed limits as part of that process? Michael, that was for you.
You're asking me?
Yeah, I'm asking you,
Okay.
rather
Yeah.
than a policy, is this a procedure?
I think
It's a long
yes,
time.
I don't know, from a policy standpoint, we're kind of bound by what the state and federal guidelines are. I think the policy direction from the council could be, and I think we already know this, is that, you know, whenever we have the opportunity to reduce speeds, we should look at that. And particularly like when we do a project, like when we do Chamblee Dunwoody in the village, where you're trying to create a, you know, pedestrian and bicycle environment in kind of a downtown type area, that's definitely one that should be part of the process of that project, is trying to look at reducing that speed limit. Did I answer your question?
Yes, you did. I'm just, yes, Joe, go ahead.
just, I appreciate everyone's input and so on, but my initial ask was that we develop a written policy that defines the process. So if we have a one-stop shop, I honestly, I did not know until a few minutes ago that permits are approved every 3 years submitted by the police. I just didn't see that on the memo, don't know where we have it in one-stop shop to refer to that. Let me take it up another higher level for folks sitting on council. When I'm knocking on doors, campaigning, going on Happy Hollow or Tilly Mill or Peeler or North Beach or wherever, up and down on Chamblee, everybody who lives on every one of those roads, one of the top issues was speeding and not feeling safe for their children to play in their yards. And so I have to say, what can I do on council is adopt potential policies. And that's what I'm asking the council to just to revisit, that we put something together in paper, that we take some real stepwise procedure and look at what Atlanta did last year, where they revisited everything. They brought in a Georgia Tech PhD from CDC that works in injury prevention to try to develop these systemic, holistic policies here. We also can look at other standards other than MUTCD, which would be legally potentially used as speed studies, that we could put an argument together for GDOT to apply different measures, NACTO guidelines. There's other standards other than MUTCD. All these things could be vetted out during a process, during a procedure where we bring in a few subject matter experts, some other people in the public to vet that and to put that in that policy. So we could think out of the box. And I'll also say, you will find when Sandy Springs reduced the speed limit on Johnson Ferry, Mount Vernon changed its name to Johnson Ferry as you cross Roswell Road. It was 35. All of a sudden one day there were signs posted 25. And there's no change in the characteristics or nothing. And I did an open records request, but I was not able to get the information from Sandy Springs if they submitted that to GDOT for their approval or not for radar. And the other idea is, what are the other enforcement measures without radar that is available for Georgia law enforcement? Can they use timers? Can they pace people? What are other mechanisms other than radar that we can use for enforcement for speed limits? And I guarantee, even though GDOT says its only lowest is 25 in all of Georgia at every city, I guarantee you will find 15 mile an hour and 20 mile an hour posted speed limits on public roads in the state of Georgia. And that local municipality made a decision to post that out there to give the drivers a signal to say, we're really going to make this pedestrian friendly and family friendly and usable for the people on the road. So I just think that there's other ideas that we could think out of the boxes out there. I just want to try to see is what we can do. Yes, we want to re-engineer and do traffic calming and so on, which is millions and millions or tens of millions of dollars throughout the whole city. I know I want to get to there. So I just hope that we could sit back and think about putting something to paper. Thank you all.
So when is our transportation plan updated?
The last update was in 2017, so
This year, or is it 5 years or 10?
it can be whatever the council wants it to be, but typically somewhere 5-year minimum, 10-year maximum, probably.
I think I guess we can talk about it at the retreat. Actually, Eric, it'd be a good thing to talk about at the retreat. And I think this actually would dovetail nicely with a transportation plan discussion of that. So I think that works well, fits with that because it's all part and parcel of the same thing. So we have the retreat in just a few weeks. And so we will put all this on there. How's that? So,
If I may, and I'd like to see, some of these alternate ways that Joe's talking about, if we could just get some examples of that we didn't have in this discussion, as part of that discussion. I mean, I think in general, council's supportive of lower speed limits, Joe, but, I'm still trying to figure out what the policy document does for us that we don't have already. Because we're already taking, where we can, we're taking steps to reduce speed limits. You know, we've talked about a few specific examples. You know, I just don't see that as something that we need a big policy document about if we're already doing it. But if there's parts of this that we can use, you know, if there's some way we can use a policy document to get to where we can do these lower speed limits where it makes sense, then great. But I just need to have a little bit more understanding of, you know, why we're creating an extra bureaucratic step.
But that being said, if staff has the ability to go through and look at the speed limits in the entire city, map it all out, and make sure that we are currently at the lowest speed limit that's enforceable by state law, then that would be something we should see. And if there's any reason that there's a street that's above the minimum that could be lowered, that would be enforceable, please bring that to us and we'll take a look at that too. So.
We can do that.
I think it fits. Go ahead, Joe.
One last item too, and I'd like to see if the council would agree that there's a point in time that we would be involved. When do we find out, when do we learn that we're looking for a speed study in a certain area, when we're submitting it, when does council get vetted on that? And yes, speed limits, Ashford Center Parkway, it was changed from 25 to 30. So there was an increase in the speed limit. I wasn't on council at the time, and I don't know if council was sought for advice for Ashford Center Parkway for that raising of that speed limit.
Okay, those are good questions, and we'll get back. We'll work on it. We're not going to solve this overnight. Go ahead, John. Did you have something?
No, I was just going to, basically what Joe is saying is that council is the one who gives the guidance to staff and staff follows. So I mean, we're looking for the documentation and the data so that we can make educated decisions and help guide staff make the right decisions.
Yes.
I mean, it's a data question. It's what's enforceable. And if there are streets that are not on the radar list that should be, that are problematic, then we can add those too. But it's a data question that we don't have the information. And once the information can be analyzed by council, that information can go back to staff to make appropriate changes.
Yeah, I think we're at a good starting point of that. And I think so much of what's initiated so far in the history of the city has been initiated by council when citizens come to us. So I think that's, I don't know that we've done a speed audit, so to speak. And so, or at least not in a lot of years. And so, but I think we have a good starting point with this discussion. Anybody else? I can't see.
Last thing. I'm going to get one off with Michael and talk about some other non-MUTCD and put in touch with some of the references that I was given. I'll just send Michael a note and get with him.
Okay.
Thank you.
I think it fits in with the transportation plan process too. All right. That's it with the agenda. Public